Van Halen, Black Sabbath, Red Hot Chili Peppers. There are many famous bands from different generations that had much different earlier band names starting out. So, at an attempt to learn more about the history of rock, this video will show how it's sometimes a great idea to change your name and not keep the awful one you first came up with. Looking directly at you, Skillet. I don't care if you like Skillet's music or not, Skillet is a ridiculous name to call your band. I have 20 bands chosen and they are not ranked, it's just a list, no real order. You know how these videos work, let's get to it. Van Halen, understandably named by the brothers in the band, is a name with value, the logo is iconic, and even after changes over the years, Van Halen would still be cherished going into the 21st century and beyond, as we still blast Eruption in honor of Eddie to this day. There were several previous names before the band decided on Van Halen, but what's the one I'm gonna be sticking with? Rat Salad. That's it. I can't even make a joke about this one. It was named in tribute to Black Sabbath. Rat Salad is a choice as a band name though. I just don't see kids drawing the Rat Salad logo on notebooks in the 80s like they did with Van Halen. It was actually David Lee Roth that suggested the name Van Halen as it has some power to it. Alex and Eddie had to be convinced, and thank God, because hearing Rat Salad dominate the charts just doesn't sound right. Speaking of Black Sabbath, it's hard to think of one of the biggest metal bands of all time and knowing that the name wasn't always Black Sabbath. It's even harder to think about how Osbourne, Iommi, Geezer, they all went under the name the Polka Tulk Blues Band. Totally different sounding band also in the music. According to Iommi, he went up to Ozzy and said, "Every time I hear it, all I can picture is you with your trousers around your ankles taking a dump." It's crap. That is awesome. It was Mr. Butler eventually who saved the day when he saw a line of people about to see a Boris Karloff film, Black Sabbath. He convinced the others to try that as a name, and it worked out perfectly. Thank God, because I don't think one of the foundations of metal would be as strong on the name Polka Tulk Blues. One of my favorite name changes comes from Canada, and it's an absolute stroke of genius. Barenaked Ladies is a joke name. It's ridiculous, but think about it as a business sense from a young band. How do you get people to see your gig? If the name Barenaked Ladies is on a sign out front. Pretty funny, right? Well, the band's name before that is in the same logic, because before they were Barenaked Ladies, they were free beer. Think about it. A sign outside of a club that says, "Tonight, free beer." That was the point also, to attract people in the bar scene. When people got upset that there was no actual free alcohol but instead a band, it made for some unhappy Canadians. Luckily, it wouldn't be too long after they changed their name Barenaked Ladies that the group was discovered and signed. Nirvana is an iconic band name and a part of music history, helping usher in a new style of rock and a new decade. Even today, the name Nirvana no longer connects as much with Enlightenment as it does with the grunge band and Kurt and Dave. So when you see many teenagers and even adults wearing a Nirvana band shirt as fashion, think about how it could have been Pencap Chew. Doesn't exactly sound as iconic and unique. It just sounds like they were looking for the first thing to the right of them and saw a chewed up pen cap. And that's what they went for the band name. Cobain then later thought of the name Nirvana, wanting something nicer sounding and not as angry for a band name, selling the idea to the others as the name meaning the attainment of perfection. Pencap Chew would be named a song for the band later on, and the chew would live on in that format. I was a big fan of Finger 11 before the Paralyzer days, when they were still breaking out and getting attention for their nu metal style in the grayest of blue skies. Finger 11 changed sounds a lot over the years with many different subgenres covered, and Finger 11 was also the result of a change as the band's previous name was Rainbow Butt Monkeys. Yep, Rainbow Butt Monkeys even released music independently up in Canada back in the day and toured around Ontario with the name. I do feel that after the nu metal days, the success of songs like One Thing and Paralyzer would not have been as strong if radio DJs say Rainbow Butt Monkeys coming up next. The band finally changed their name in '97 and decided to get the monkey off their backs, even though some people would argue Finger 11 is an odd name itself. Still easier to hear than Rainbow Butt Monkeys though. It makes sense that a band with as wild of a history as Red Hot Chili Peppers would have a ridiculous first name, and as over the top some of the antics from Anthony Flea and the rest would get, keep in mind it could have been much more ridiculous if Blood Sugar Sex Magic came from the band Tony Flo and the miraculously majestic Masters of Mayhem. Sweet mercy, that's a mouthful. While the Peppers only played 2 shows under the name before changing, it was an absolute ridiculous bit with Kiedis dressed up in random clothing. Anthony said, "That was how we wanted to play, majestic and chaotic. I was wearing a paisley corduroy 3/4 length robe and a fluorescent orange hunting cap. Oddly enough, I was totally sober." Right. The band that loves California more than any other group ever, I don't think would have seen their names on MTV as much if the VJ had to keep saying Tony Flo and the miraculously majestic Masters of Mayhem. For a nice change of pace, a band like Def Leppard had a legendary, unique name, but their original name was not exactly terrible. While a young group from Sheffield, England was forming, they were originally working under the name Atomic Mass. Say what you want, but I truly don't think Atomic Mass is an awful name for a group, even if it's not as memorable as catchy as Def Leppard. The problem is that under the name Atomic Mass, Def Leppard could not get paying gigs to make ends meet. Joe Elliott, who at the time was designing art class posters with a fake name called Def Leppard, spelled correctly, after changing the spelling a touch, Def Leppard was born. Atomic Mass, Def Leppard, no matter how big or small of a name, Sheffield's boys made something huge of themselves, and the catalyst for change came out of an art class. Important for you to show up to your electives, kids, because $1 million idea could come out of it. Now for a more innocent name change. From the mid-90s to mid-2000s, every alternative and top 40 station became more than familiar with Sugar Ray. Handsome frontman, a band lightening their style from heavy to light and catchy, Sugar Ray was just a part of the culture back then. You know what else is a part of many people's youths? Shrinky dinks, the little art pieces you heat up in the oven and they get huge. Why bring that up? Because that is literally what Sugar Ray called themselves when the band formed, the Shrinky Dinks. That is adorable. Milton Bradley did not think it was adorable though, and threatened to sue the baggy 90s pants off of the group. At that point, the band renamed themselves after the moniker of boxing legend Sugar Ray Robinson. Nobody was sued, Sugar Ray went on to make a massive success for themselves, and no one dared to ever use the name the Shrinky Dinks in vain again. Speaking of naming yourself after an athlete, Pearl Jam's original name before the album 10 hit stores is a great piece of grunge trivia. Back in the 90s, when a Seattle group was starting to play shows and their demo tapes were getting serious attention, it was a big deal. Even bigger when the band was named Mookie Blaylock after an NBA player whose basketball card was randomly found in a tape case for one of those demos. Mookie Blaylock as a band name doesn't exactly roll off the tongue, and there would be a lot of problems trying to license and sell music under that name. The group knew they had to make a change. There are many stories about how the name Pearl Jam came to be, but according to Jeff Ament, the jam part came after seeing Neil Young play massive 20-minute jam sessions, and the name Pearl was just random. That's it. Mookie Blaylock to Pearl Jam. Odd how Pearl Jam is the less weird sounding one. One issue a band could have is when the name doesn't match the sound or style that the music reflects. U2 had that issue big back in the late 70s while everyone was still young. First, the band was named the generic Feedback for a year. That's not great, but before they changed their name to U2, the group was known as The Hype. The name also did not last long and was reflecting on the band poorly while they were mostly doing cover songs at that point. The Hype just didn't last, and after the group reduced down to 4 members, U2 was born. I'm not saying The Hype is the worst name ever, it just does not reflect most of U2's work. Can you imagine someone trying to scream, "Play the Hype!" and then With or Without You starts coming through the speakers? Not exactly as energetic as a name like The Hype would suggest. Creedence Clearwater Revival has always been a longer name in rock history, and many people just shorten it to Creedence or CCR, and as important as John Fogerty and company are in rock history, I am confident history would not remember CCR's music fondly if they had to stick with their original name, the Gollywogs. That is awkward. I am intentionally dancing around just what that term refers to. Back in the 60s, it was the label owner who gave them the name, and then in 1967, when said label Fantasy Records was bought out, the new owner made them change the name. Thank goodness. Even though CCR did not come up with that original name themselves, they do have the unpleasant distinction of performing with it in their early days. Sometimes history is rough to learn. Moving on quickly. Let's go back to a fun-loving band who is all about the flash and dazzle. Kiss, who I believe are scheduling their 12th farewell tour, didn't start out wearing makeup and platforms. In fact, in the early days, it was quite the opposite, with some boring, harmonious music with little guitar work to stand out. What did stand out was the band's name, Wicked Lester. You'd think that a group with a name like Wicked Lester would be a little more shocking and intense, but Gene Simmons talked about how in those days the music was more akin to Doobie Brothers. Simmons and Stanley moved on from Wicked Lester and found a new drummer in Peter Criss, where Stanley proposed the name Kiss because the name would lead to sounding cool and leading to the ladies. To be fair, it would lead to more attention from the ladies than the band name Wicked Lester. Even from the beginning, Gene Simmons was in it for the ladies, to the surprise of no one. Radiohead is a big name starting from the 90s, and as the story goes, was found from a bunch of high schoolers all loving Talking Heads back in the day. The issue is that before Radiohead adopted that name, they were a young group with infrequent gigs calling themselves On a Friday. As generic as a name as could be, the name came from when the kids could get together after school let out on Fridays. days. That's all. I mean, they were in high school and playing was the priority, along with just trying to find places to play at beside someone's house. After some demos were recorded with the On a Friday name that even featured future Radiohead songs, the group realized that it's not going to be a Friday forever. I also don't think the classics like OK Computer and Kid A would have reached as many people with the generic On a Friday moniker. Back to the early days of Green Day, where Billy Joe and Mike were goofing off in the late 80s and gaining attention in the California punk scene. Only back in the 80s, they were known as the innocent-sounding Sweet Children. Adorable, innocent, and not exactly punk-sounding. Sweet Children still gained a following and got signed to a label as teenagers. It was soon after getting signed they realized they should change their name so the music wouldn't be confused with Sweet Baby, another California group. The term Green Day came to mind as it was the name of one of their earlier songs, and it was a meaning for the lifestyle for the young group back then, where nothing is done outside of smoking out. To be fair, that's much more punk-sounding than Sweet Children. Sweet Children singing about smoking out sounds odd. Continuing in pop-punk, Blink-182 has been a music standout for decades, and the number following of name was a big trend from the 90s, Blink-182. Blink wasn't always named that, however, as the group's original name was a bit sillier but somehow just as appropriate for the group, Duct Tape. Not duct tape as in the silver metal binding tape, but duck quack quack tape. Get it? It's a play on the word. That's the joke. That's Blink-182 in a nutshell. I'm not sure what I expected when I'm thinking what Blink's previous name was, but somehow duct tape fits perfectly. I can't explain it. There are ridiculous theories to what the 182 represents, including some introduced by the band, but at least duct tape is simple and innocent going all the way back to roughly 1992. Well, as innocent as can be from the same group of guys that called their album Take Off Your Pants and Jacket. This one might be the most head-scratching, and I'm not sure what in the world the boys from New York were thinking before naming themselves Beastie Boys. It was before the group made it big that Adam and Mike D were not only making some rhymes that did not age well and offended many, but also calling themselves the Young Aborigines. Yep, that's a thing. It wasn't a misunderstanding either. Back when the boys were much more of a hardcore group, the name was intended to describe how their music was primitive. That's the explanation. After a bit of time and some early members leaving, the group changed to Beastie Boys. According to Mike D about the name Beastie Boys, it was the stupidest name we could have come up with.
No, the one before the name Beastie Boys was the stupidest.
I love Beastie Boys, but wow, that's awkward. And Beastie Boys have a lot of awkward stuff in their early careers, so the fact that this one stands out is wild. A little earlier in that same time frame, The Cure were becoming a phenomenon in the UK and beyond, and long before the goth stylings of Robert Smith and company, The Cure was something a bit tamer. When middle school boys got together in the 70s, they decided that they should name themselves the Obelisk. What's an obelisk? A tall, long monument with a pyramid top. And since it was middle school boys thinking this up, it most likely was a reference to something much more suggestive and childish. There were several other name changes along with the lineup changes over the years before Robert Smith finally came forward from the piano and was allowed to take lead, deciding that the name The Cure had more of a ring to it. Smith was right. It was the perfect name for a group with that sound. Not the Obelisk. For one of my favorite bands of all time with a world of unfortunate history behind them, Pink Floyd's music is as good as their past is sordid and chaotic. Before the name Pink Floyd came to fruition, however, there were several previous monikers. The one I want to focus on was the one that sounds the most ridiculous, Screaming Abdabs. What's Screaming Abdabs? A British term for describing the heebie-jeebies, or the willies, or the giblies in the words of Strong Bad. The majesty and life-changing music that Pink Floyd made in the 60s and all through the 70s may not have sunk in as well if the awfully serious Wish You Were Here also had Screaming Abdabs on the cover somewhere. I'm glad Waters and everyone got over their case of the Screaming Abdabs at the time and were able to think of a unique name that didn't resemble being uncomfortable with a silly saying. The 60s and 70s were a weird time. The Doobie Brothers already have a name worth remembering, and back in the day some people probably thought that name was ridiculous or evil if you asked the appropriate soccer mom against drugs and rock and roll. But regardless of the name, Doobie Brothers being funny or not, the name fit the music. You know what did not fit? The name Pud. Literally just PUD. That's not an acronym for those wondering either. It's referring to exactly what you think it is. It wasn't until Skip, Tom, and John picked up a few more new members and realizing the word PUD isn't exactly something to be known for. So they went with Doobie Brothers. They went from Pud to Doobie. You know what? They didn't care. They just wanted to have fun. People loved them. Whatever. Naming your band is harder for some people than others, especially when you were high and giggling about Pud. Ending with arguably the worst idea to have for a band name by one of the best-selling American rock bands of all time. Joking aside, Creed is a solid band name. It's good that they finally chose the name Creed based on a similar name from Brian Marshall's previous group, because before then, these four booked gigs and worked under the name Naked Toddler. Naked Toddler. It comes from a newspaper article that Mark Tremonti saw, and he convinced the group it was a good idea. Yikes. According to Scott Stapp, the name didn't go over well. Girls hated it and said it made them think of I'm not gonna even say that word. I don't want to have to say that on my channel. Wow. After Creed started hitting it big with radio play in my own prison days, the era of Naked Toddler had begun, and it's all thanks to Scott Stapp realizing that a name like that isn't going to look good on a marquee.
Scott Stapp was the voice of reason in all this. Wow, times have changed. And that was a look at 20 famous bands and their original names. Know of another group that had a crazy name? Leave a comment and let everyone know. Big thanks to my patrons and a special thanks to Chris Doman. You can have a say in upcoming videos, get weekly new music playlists, and see videos early by supporting Rocked on Patreon. Please click the link in the video description for more info. Please subscribe and ring the bell to get notified on upcoming videos, and you can keep up to date with Rocked on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Thank you for watching through a video that's a bit more lighthearted and meant to be fun, and also proof that no matter what you call yourself now, you can always change it if it sounds awful.